Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're tackling, well, an absolutely unprecedented stack of sources. We're diving into a narrative that doesn't just, revise history.
No, not at all.
It seems to aim at fundamentally rewiring how you understand the very origins of modern identity, conflict, and statecraft in the Middle East.
That's a perfect way to put it. The material we have in front of us posits a truly radical, systemic reinterpretation of Ottoman and modern Turkish history. It's not suggesting just minor influences.
Right.
It argues that these massive historical shifts, we're talking everything from palace coups to the foundational documents of a national identity, were all driven by hidden networks.
So our mission today is to really unpack this specific and, frankly, very dense narrative. It centers on the influence of Sabatatürk, this crypto-Jewish movement, and its deep, deep connections to Zionism.
And the narrative contends that these groups have been the sort of uncredited architects of key turning points in the region for centuries. It's controversial, of course.
Of course. But the points are so specific, they're detailed, structured, and we're going to walk through them one by one, focusing on what this material is presenting.
And the structural critique here is, I think, immediately shocking. It begins not with a historical event, but with this fundamental philosophical challenge to the idea of modernity itself.
It says modernity was never an age of free thought.
Exactly. It argues that this entire concept, this popular perception of modernity as a time of genuine self-determination, is false.
That's a massive way to start. It's basically arguing that this whole era, supposedly defined by liberalism and self-discovery, is just rhetoric.
Just rhetoric.
Really?
Necessary, it says, to secure social consent and legitimacy for what the source calls central capitalist hegemony.
What's fascinating to me here is the assertion that modernity is actually the period with the most dogmas, not the least.
It's a total inversion of what we're taught. The source suggests this period employs massive manipulative propaganda methods, and they're designed specifically to suppress free thought, discussion, and debate.
So it's the largest manipulative era in history precisely because the manipulation is hidden. It's all under this veneer of rationality and freedom.
That's the frame. Before we even get to sultans and revolutions, the source sets the stage. We are operating in a world where history and identity are heavily manipulated. And that manipulation was allegedly pioneered by the very forces we are at to discuss.
The scale of intentional concealment is the core issue.
And we should add a necessary word on methodology, which the source addresses directly. This analysis focuses on specific historical segments identified as Zionist elites or groups connected to them.
And it's explicit about this not being anti-Semitism.
Very explicit. It states this is a critical function of necessary social science, sociology, politics, history and understanding, and critiquing historical power structures. It's purely focused on analyzing the actions of certain identifiable historical power groups.
Okay, let's unpack this. We have to start at the beginning. The establishment of this alleged network in the Ottoman lands going all the way back to the 14th century.
Right. So when we look at the historical roots that this material presents, the whole narrative kicks off with the forced migration of Jewish populations who were fleeing persecution in Europe.
We're talking about the Spanish Inquisition, mainly.
Primarily, yes. But it was a sustained influx, not just one event. The source points to three major waves, 1391, then the big one in 1492, and then another significant wave in the 1550s.
And 1492 is the real turning point.
It is. That's when the Ottoman Empire, under Sultan Bayezid II, officially welcomed and accepted these populations. The source notes this acceptance wasn't just humanitarian, it marked a strategic opportunity for the incoming groups.
And they didn't just, settle quietly in some corner of the empire. They established major hubs.
Huge hubs. Thessaloniki and Izmir became the primary centers, but the source argues their influence quickly extended way beyond commerce. It suggests they leveraged the cultural knowledge, the political experience they'd acquired over centuries of dispersion and survival across Europe to gain a real political advantage.
Which leads directly into the claimed mechanism of their early power: covert penetration of the harem.
Yes, and for anyone who isn't familiar with Ottoman history, you have to understand the harem was so much more than just a place where the Sultan's family lived.
It was the ultimate power center.
Ultimate power center. Wives, mothers, concubines, they wielded massive, often unseen influence over the Sultan and, by extension, the entire empire.
So initially, the source suggests the strategy was marrying daughters into the palace. a kind of subtle infiltration of the system.
A very subtle infiltration. But that structure, they argue, later became far more effective, more ideologically organized through Sabatachulik. And this all eventually leads to what the source claims was significant control during the Committee of Union and Progress era, the CUP.
Let's get into the specifics, because the harem anecdotes used by the source are, well, they're dramatic. The material uses three key women to illustrate this claimed strategy.
The first, and certainly the most famous, is Hurrem Sultan, the legendary wife of Suleiman the Magnificent. Her life spanned from about 1506 to 1558.
And the source claims she was of Polish-Jewish origin, captured young in 1520 and then presented to the palace. She is, of course, historically famous for being the only woman legally married to an Ottoman sultan.
And the source attributed some incredibly consequential political maneuvering to her. It alleges she orchestrated the elimination of her rival, the Grand Vizier Ibrahim Pasha.
A man who held immense power. He was practically the co-ruler.
He was. And after he was gone, she allegedly ensured the appointment of Rustem Pasha and then cemented that alliance by arranging his marriage to her own daughter, Mirima Sultan.
That's an incredible accusation against a figure we mostly know from, Ottoman and European court accounts.
It is. The source material makes these assertions about her Jewish origin and then connects them retrospectively to these massive political outcomes. I mean, the most dramatic political claim regarding Hurrem is her alleged manipulation that led to the execution of Shahzada Mustafa.
The beloved son of Mahidevran Sultan, he was the designated heir.
He was the heir apparent and immensely popular with the army and the people. With Mustafa gone, the path was cleared for her own sons to take the throne.
And this is where that specific detail about lineage comes in, which the source explicitly highlights.
Right. The importance of the mother, the woman, in the harem for any long-term strategy. This is because Jewish tradition passes lineage through the mother. It emphasizes the strategic value of controlling the dynastic line through the women.
It's a generational play, which brings us to the next one.
Moving to the next generation, we have Nurbanu Sultan. She was the mother of Murat III and the wife of Selim II. Lived from about 1525 to 1587.
And she is also claimed by the source to be a child of a Jewish family, kidnapped at around age 10 and then sold into the slave market in Istanbul.
Her rise sounds, according to this narrative, almost perfectly engineered. She was allegedly discovered by Hurrem Sultan herself.
So Hurrem picked her successor, in a way.
That's the implication. Hurrem was instrumental in arranging her marriage to her son, Prince Selim. She was even given the name Nurbanu, which means queen who scatters God's light.
And the narrative calls what happens next the coincidence of success.
Yes, in quotes. Selim becomes sultan after all of his brothers coincidentally die. Nurbanu then manages the empire from behind the curtain for years as the Valid Sultan, the queen mother, basically continuing the power structure Hurrem had established.
The source isn't framing this as luck.
Not at all. It's framed as a deliberate, successive implementation of influence, a plan being carried out over decades.
And the third figure who rounds out this trio?
That would be Safi Sultan, who lived from 1550 to 1618. She was the mother of Mehmet III. And again, the source claims she was Jewish, kidnapped at age 14. Her original name was Sophia.
And her entry was facilitated by Nurbanu.
Directly. Nurbanu sought her out for her own son, Murat III. Sophia then very quickly solidified her position by giving birth to the future emperor, Mehmet III, securing her spot in this line of power.
So the source suggests that this concentration of power, starting with Hurrem, continuing through Nurbanu and Sophia, gave the Jewish community significant political and economic leverage at the absolute highest echelons of the empire for over a century.
It even goes further. The source expands the implication, suggesting that the increasing intolerance shown toward certain Christian groups during those years, a period when this harem influence was strong, was a calculated response to the pogroms that Jews had suffered in places like Spain.
So it's tying external historical events directly to internal palace policy.
Exactly. And crucially, the narrative notes that these kinds of relentless ambition and political captures, like the alleged maneuvering that led to Mustafa's execution or the later assassination of the great Grand Vizier Sokulu Mehmet Pasha, demonstrate a consistent pattern of capturing and maintaining power right next to the throne.
Now, to really grasp the high stakes these women were operating under, we need to pause for the historical context of succession, which the source emphasizes.
Yes, the institutionalized practice of fratricide.
It sounds brutal.
The practice of succession in the Ottoman Empire was inherently violent and, frankly, ruthless. The source details Fatih Sultan Mehmet's law, the Fatih Kanunamesi. This was the actual legal justification for killing your own siblings for the stability, the Nizam Alim of the state.
And this was legally sanctioned?
Yes, and it's important to remember, the source notes the ulema, the religious scholars, approved this brutal practice. They embedded it directly in the state's legal framework.
The examples cited are just. They show the scale of the carnage.
They do. The source notes figures like Sultan Mehmet III killing 19 of his own brothers and his son, Mahmud. Even Kanuni Sultan Suleiman, Hurrem's husband, executed his sons, Mustafa and Mehmet.
The source quotes the historian John Keegan, who noted that the favorite woman in the harem often managed to break the rule of primogeniture.
Right. And this would lead to the newly enthroned sultan systematically killing all of his brothers. This wasn't just passion or spite. The ultimate justification was always the salvation of the country.
So fratricide becomes a traditional legalized rule of the state institution, approved by the Sheikhul Islam.
Precisely. And this context is so vital because it shows the incredibly perilous political arena these women were operating in. The alleged influence wielded by Hurrem, Nurbanu, and Safi wasn't in some gentle, refined court.
No, it was a life-and-death struggle for dynastic survival. One successful political maneuver could result in the mass execution of rival family members, a true high-risk environment.
And with that historical stage set for this idea of dynastic infiltration, we pivot from the palace to the religious ideology that allegedly organized this power, the story of Sabbatai Sevi.
This brings us to the figure who gave this movement its name, Sabbatai Sevi. The source calls him the pseudo-messiah who emerged in the 17th century.
And what's remarkable here, and what the source really stresses, is the sheer scale and reach of his movement. I mean, it was global. It gathered about 1 million followers in the Ottoman Empire alone.
1 million followers.
1 million. It split world Jewry, and its influence stretched across continents, impacting not just Judaism, but also Islam and Christianity.
He was born on August 1st, 1626 in Izmir. And he was named Sabbatai because he was born on a Saturday, the Sabbath, which was a Jewish custom.
And the source notes the historical coincidence of that date. It also commemorates the destruction of the first and second Jewish temples in Jerusalem.
He declared his messiahship in 1648 at just 22 years old, setting in motion this immensely influential historical movement. After traveling, he returned to Izmir, and his movement it reached a fever pitch.
It did, and the confrontation with the Ottoman state began when he traveled to Istanbul in early 1666. His followers genuinely believed he was traveling there to take power from the Sultan Mehmet IV.
So they saw this as the final act.
The final act. But the Sultan's court was alerted by complaints from rabbis in Izmir who saw him as a dangerous heretic. The Grand Vizier, Fazıl Ahmet Pasha, had Sabbatai's ship intercepted at the Dardanelles.
And he was brought to Istanbul in chains.
In chains. Initially imprisoned in the Bagno dungeon, but the source material indicates a strategic change of location. The Ottoman administration, they wanted to avoid any civil unrest right before their big Crete campaign, so they decided to move him to a castle in Gallipoli, in Gelibolu.
And this is where the movement gained a kind of paradoxical strength.
Exactly. His imprisonment in Gelibolu actually made him more influential. It solidified his role as a persecuted messiah. Thousands of his adherents visited him there, and his following just exploded.
So when complaints mounted again about his continued influence, Sultan Mehmet IV ordered his transfer to Edirne.
And in Edirne, the definitive moment arrived. Sabbatai was subjected to a cross-examination that the Sultan himself watched secretly from behind a screen. He was given a brutal ultimatum.
Prove his prophecy.
Prove his prophecy by surviving an archer's arrow, or convert to Islam as punishment.
He chose conversion.
He chose conversion. He embraced Islam and saved his life. And the source notes that the Sultan not only spared him, but appointed him gatekeeper chief of Kapıcı Basha at the Edirne Palace, and even gave him a salary.
This conversion must have caused a massive rift among his million followers.
A huge rift. Many abandoned him. They saw it as apostasy, as a complete betrayal. But the source focuses on this critical group that interpreted it completely differently.
They saw it as a strategic move.
A necessary strategic move. An act of holy sin, or a kind of strategic concealment required to fulfill his messianic destiny.
And Sabbatai Sevi quickly reinforced that interpretation.
Immediately, he secretly messaged his loyal followers that his conversion was, in his words, merely a strategic game, a necessary external mask.
So as a result, many of his followers adopted the exact same strategy. They converted to Islam in appearance, but secretly maintained their Sabbateist Jewish beliefs.
And this group earned the name of Deti, or more commonly Dunme, which means the converted. They lived in these dual identities.
Sabbatay remained in the Edirne Palace for 7 years after that.
He did, but complaints about his continued secret organizing eventually led to his exile to Albania, where he later died.
But the movement itself endured.
It did. Around 200 families who had followed him settled in Thessaloniki, continuing their lives as outwardly Muslim but inwardly Sabbateist Jewish. And the source notes that they were subsequently separated from the mainstream Jewish communities who saw them as apostates and outsiders.
And Thessaloniki is so critical here.
Absolutely critical. The source highlights that this city later became the intellectual and political cradle for the development of Turkism. It bred many of the influential politicians who would go on to dominate the late Ottoman and early Republican landscape.
So when the 1924 population exchange occurred between Greece and Turkey,
These Dunme groups migrated to Turkey. They settled mainly in affluent Istanbul neighborhoods like Şişli and Nişantaşı, and this brings us directly to their massive entry into the political sphere.
all right, this is where the script dives into the core political assertions, linking the Dunme community directly to those seismic shifts of the early 20th century.
Yes, and the source begins by noting that radical Islamist thought already views Sabbatai as a clear historical extension of Zionism.
The source material focuses intensely on the confrontation between the late Ottoman state and the burgeoning political Zionist movement, and it all centers on one man.
Sultan Abdülhamit II.
Right. The source details these known meetings between Abdülhamit and Theodor Herzl, the founding father of political Zionism in the early 1900s. And the offer on the table was staggering.
It was huge sums of money to finance a Jewish state in Palestine, even offering to cover the entirety of the Ottoman Empire's massive foreign debt.
And this is where the political friction really reached its peak. It leads to the Sultan's now famous rejection quote, which the source emphasizes.
It does. I will not sell even a single span of this land. My people sacrifice blood for every inch. The Turkish Empire does not belong to me, but to the Turkish people. Let the Jews keep their money.
That is an astonishingly firm political statement, especially when you consider what the source alleges happened next. If that quote is accurate, it perfectly sets up the motive for the coming revolution.
And the source claims the Zionists never forgot this rejection. It marks it as the direct precursor to the subsequent actions taken against him.
Which brings us to the Committee of Union and Progress, the CUP, or Ittihat Taraqi.
Yes. The source posits that the Sabbatai's political role became massively pronounced within the CUP. It notes their specific interests in Masonry and a particular mystical tradition called Melamilik.
Okay, let's unpack that jargon, because the source introduces terms here that are vital to its central claim of a hidden structure. First, Melamelik. What is the significance of the source claiming Sabbataists were interested in this tradition?
Melamilik is a heterodox, a kind of Sufi tradition known for being highly anti-establishment and secretive. Unlike mainstream Sufi orders, Melamists often refused to show any outward signs of piety. They were sometimes viewed with a lot of suspicion by the official religious class.
So they operated under the radar.
Exactly. And the source suggests that the CUP, allegedly infiltrated by Sabbataists, was drawn to Melamilik because of its secretive and anti-establishment nature. It provided a perfect cover and an intellectual framework for clandestine political operations against the Sultan and the existing Ottoman order.
So it's an ideological shield for their operational style. And speaking of operations, when Abdülhamit II was formally dethroned in 1909,
The CUP delegation that delivered the decision included Emanuel Karasu.
who the source explicitly identifies as a member of the Thessaloniki Jewish community, this visually links the overthrow directly to this alleged network.
And the source makes some very firm assertions about the Masonic connection. It states that Masonry has been under Jewish control since its foundation, serving this ideal of world governance, the belief that they are a chosen race destined to govern all others.
So the CUP, therefore, is alleged to have worked under the direct command and financing of Western Jewish Masonic organizations.
Yes. And the source also dives into the organizational model the CUP adopted. It claims they imitated the Italian Masonic organization, the Carbonari.
And what does that tell us about their structure?
Well, the Carbonari, from the early 1800s, was a revolutionary secret society. They operated in these decentralized cells, they functioned like a state within a state, and they had their own secret courts to judge internal crimes.
So they were a law unto themselves.
Completely. And the source argues that the CUP adopted this model precisely for internal conquest and infiltration. It allowed them to exert control without having any clear public accountability.
That's a profound operational model, a secret power structure judging and acting outside the law of the existing state. And the source argues this method is allegedly still used today.
It does, by modern Turkish deep state groups.
And this is where the jargon gets very specific and modern. When the source talks about these groups, they list organizations like Ergenekon and JTEM. For a global audience, we need to clarify what those accusations imply.
Let's start with Ergenekon. According to the widespread allegations the source is referring to, Ergenekon is a controversial, alleged secularist deep state network within Turkey.
And they were accused of what?
Political assassinations, bombings, engineering coups, anything to destabilize the government and maintain the staunchly secularist order that was established by the Republic's founders. The source suggests this network operates with the same clandestine structure as the CUP.
And JTEM.
JTEM is an acronym for the Gendarmerie Intelligence and Counterterrorism Organization. It was an unofficial and highly controversial intelligence structure allegedly operating within the Turkish gendarmerie.
Especially active during the conflict in the Kurdish regions in the 90s.
Very active. The source suggests both JTEM and Ergenekon, despite their alleged ideological differences, adopt the same CUP-style Carbonari method of a secret state operating outside legal boundaries.
So the narrative ties the secret revolutionary tactics of the early 20th century directly to the deep state controversies of the 21st. Now, let's look at the key political figures identified in the source during this transition.
The influence of Sabateists, according to the source, started immediately with the CP's first cabinet. Kavit Bey, a Sabateist politician, served as finance minister.
A critical role, controlling the economy.
The source notes his presence there as very deliberate, and Kavit Bey's career spanned the transition to the Republic. He maintained his role as finance minister in the early Republican era.
But he was later executed.
Yes, for participating in the alleged Izmir assassination attempt against Mustafa Kemal. The source hints at these internal power struggles within the Republican movement itself, even among the founders.
Beyond Kavit Bey, the source lists several other prominent modern figures whom specialists allegedly claim to be Sabatei.
It does. It lists people like Osmail Cem, Rashan Asavit, Tansu and Uzer Çiller, and Suleiman Demirel. The explicit conclusion drawn is that the political, socioeconomic, and cultural influence of Sabateists in Ottoman and Turkish history simply cannot be ignored.
The source says it's pervasive.
Pervasive. And moreover, the source notes that some Sabateist figures have allegedly maintained a very negative stance against democratization and internal peace processes in Turkey, indicating their involvement in ongoing political tensions aimed at preventing social unity.
This entire section really solidifies the source's core thesis, that the transition from the Ottoman Empire to the Republic was not some spontaneous, organic movement.
No, it was a controlled transformation heavily guided by these groups, setting the stage for the creation of the modern Turkish identity itself.
Which moves us to what the source considers the ultimate act of strategic concealment, the invention of Turkish nationalism.
This is maybe the most provocative part of the entire narrative. The source states explicitly that the development of Turkism was the handiwork of Jews. It was adopted as a Turkish color to serve their historical goals in the Middle East.
The claim is unambiguous. Official, state-sanctioned Turkism is, in its essence, a Jewish Zionist invention, not a product of internal, organic Turkish dynamics.
It's a massive assertion that challenges the very foundation of the modern Turkish state.
So why, according to the source, was this necessary? Why go to the trouble of inventing Turkism?
The source argues that for much of the Ottoman period, the Turkish identity was actually looked down upon or viewed with a kind of contempt by the Ottoman elite. They preferred the cosmopolitan identity of being Ottomans.
Right, Turk was almost a pejorative for a provincial peasant.
Exactly. Only in the late stages, when the empire was collapsing and a new identity was desperately needed, did Jewish thinkers allegedly leverage and aggressively promote the idea of Turkism as a component of their own geopolitical strategy.
And the goal was what?
The goal was to create a strong, secular, nationalist entity that would control the region while remaining, aligned with external Zionist interests.
So who are these alleged architects? The source traces Turkism's precursors back to the 19th century westernization movements and focuses heavily on two key intellectual figures.
The first is Leon Cahun. The source identifies him as a French Jewish citizen who became a central theorist of Turkism. In 1869, he wrote Introduction to the History of Asia, Turks and Mongols.
And the source emphasizes that this book contained wildly exaggerated claims about the Turks and their history, designed to inflate their sense of racial and historical importance.
And it worked. It quickly became a fundamental source for Turkish racists and nationalists. Its influence, according to the source, cannot be overstated. It was a primary reference for Ziya Gökalp, who codified the ideology in his book, The Foundations of Turkism.
And it was frequently used by Mustafa Kemal himself in the Republican era.
It was. The source even brings in a quote from the scholar Semil Meris, who famously called Cahun's book the Quran of Turkish nationalism.
So this is the intellectual blueprint.
This is the blueprint. Cahun also contributed to the narrative through fiction, writing the novel Gök Berak, or Blue Banner, in 1876, further embedding these concepts in the popular imagination.
And the second alleged inventor of Turkish nationalism.
That would be Armin Hermann van Bury, also identified by the source as Jewish. His role was more institutional and organizational. He established the very first Turkology chair at Budapest University in 1870.
So he legitimized the academic study of Turkish history and language on the world stage.
Precisely. And van Bury also played a major organizational role, according to the source. He was the honorary president of the world's first Turkish society, founded in Budapest in 1908. He also held the honorary presidency of the Turan Society, established in 1910.
Which promoted pan-Turkism, the idea of a union of all Turkic peoples.
Exactly. And the source argues that these groups, along with the Young Turk movement and the CUP, were all working under and financed by Western Jewish Masonic organizations. They were creating a political and academic infrastructure designed to promote Turkism as the new national ideology.
So if Cahun and van Bury provided the intellectual framework, the source identifies the Republican architect of assimilation as a man named Avram Galanti.
Yes, who'd later adopted the surname Bodrumlu. The source claims his studies in Turkism were far more systematic and deeper, ensuring the ideology was implemented directly into the state structure.
And he was highly integrated into that new state structure.
Very. He was a professor, and he served 2 terms as a member of parliament, one for the CHP, the main party, and one as an independent. His ideology, according to the source, was extremely rigid and focused on total assimilation.
It promoted a racist line that demanded the erasure of cultural differences among all peoples in Turkey.
Which is where the source makes the claim that Galanti is the true theorist behind today's single-state, single-language, single-nation understanding, the very bedrock of state ideology.
And he took the intellectual connection to its most, well, shocking extreme.
He did. Galanti allegedly connected the Turks directly to the Torah. In his writings, he argued that Turks descended from Togarma, who was the son of Yasuf, thereby attempting to ideologically unite Turkism and Judaism by giving Turks a biblical lineage.
That is the ultimate nugget of knowledge this deep dive provides. It's an attempt to legitimize this newly created Turkish identity not through secular history, but through a shared religious historical root.
And here's the other major insight. The source claims that Avram Galanti is the originator of the nationalistic phrase, "Ne mutlu Türk'üm dine."
How happy is the one who says, I am a Turk?
The very phrase, the core of modern national identity. The source attributes this not to an ethnically Turkish nationalist, but to this Jewish Sabbateist figure.
And it doesn't stop there. The source adds that the fascist oath, the Türk Anda, which was read daily by millions of Turkish children from age 6 until adolescence, right up until 2013.
It was written in 1933 by another Sabbateist, Dr. Rashid Galip. This shows the pervasive and sustained influence across these foundational state symbols.
So the conclusion to this section on nationalism is clear.
It is. The source asserts that the Jewish Zionist character of Turkism has been deliberately and systematically hidden throughout Republican history. It's been portrayed instead as a spontaneous product of internal dynamics, and this method of strategic concealment is given a specific name.
The text labels it as Zionist Taqiyya.
Let's clarify Zionist Taqiyya, because the word Taqiyya is traditionally associated with the strategic concealment of one's religious beliefs, often by Shiite Muslims when they're under persecution.
So how does the source apply this to Zionism?
The source adopts this term specifically to mean strategic concealment of political and ideological goals. The source suggests the alleged architects of Turkism concealed their true origins and motives, their Zionist goals, by putting on a Turkish color.
Adopting the Turkish identity.
Yes, only to use that national identity to serve their external agenda. This ensures the ideology appears indigenous and organic when the source claims it is anything but.
It's a powerful assertion. The source material forces the listener to completely reevaluate the accepted origins of state ideology, arguing that its very foundations were intentionally veiled from the public by its alleged architects.
Which brings us to the contemporary relevance of these claims, connecting this secretive historical network to modern geopolitical conflicts.
Right. The analysis provided by the source material extends these claims of hidden influence directly into the modern era, and it focuses particularly on the conflict in the region of Kurdistan and the Kurdish freedom movement.
And the force alleges quite specifically that Zionists are the primary antagonists of the developing freedom movement in Kurdistan. It claims they are actively masterminding counterplots and working to prevent Kurdish unity and self-determination.
And this is based on the claim that Sabbataists in Turkey, along with certain Kurds who have allegedly adopted Sabbatai-Shillik, are working together.
Yes, working together to ensure a shared destiny with Israel under all circumstances.
The narrative characterizes this as a comprehensive network of betrayal. The source makes the stunning claim that Dunme Jews played the major role in the capture and handover of the Kurdish people's leader, Abdullah Öcalan.
It calls it the biggest pirate-style conspiracy of the century. That's tying a key historical trauma in the region directly back to this alleged hidden network.
And what's fascinating about this section is that the source applies the exact same structural critique to Kurdish nationalism Purtsulik that it applied to Turkish nationalism. It argues the method of invention is identical.
The parallel is explicit. Just as Turkish nationalism was allegedly cooked in centers like London, Thessaloniki, and Budapest by external forces.
The source claims that Kurdish nationalism is also being developed and financed under the command of major financial capital centers.
And this development is allegedly managed through a well-known established family in southern Kurdistan that has been palazlandırılmış, a Turkish word meaning sort of fattened up by these forces.
So the source suggests the goal is to create a fragmented, dependent Kurdish entity that serves external strategic interests rather than genuine Kurdish self-determination.
And the style is identified as identical to the invention of Turkism, Kurdish in color, but Zionist in essence and organization. The source claims the history of this project dates back 150 years, and the current main centers of this alleged Zionist-influenced Kurdish nationalism are Hewler and Suleimani.
So the source ultimately argues that this hidden hand is not just focused on manipulating one national identity.
No, it's orchestrating both Turkish and Kurdish nationalisms, ensuring that both serve an external strategic purpose. It's about preventing regional peace and genuine self-determination for either group by using manufactured conflicting nationalisms against each other.
It's a unified theory of historical manipulation spanning centuries, touching everything from palace intrigue to contemporary geopolitical conflicts.
The stunning scope.
We have covered an incredible amount of ground in this deep dive, tracing a narrative that spans over 500 years and challenges so many institutional historical certainties about the genesis of the modern Turkish state.
We began with the hidden history of the harem. We detailed the alleged infiltration by figures like Hurrem, Nurbanu, and Safiye Sultan, which the source says helped set the stage for later political organization.
Then we move through the mysterious origins of the Donme movement, following Sabate Sevi's pseudo-messiah status, his strategic conversion, which the source calls a game, and the subsequent establishment of that secret community in Thessaloniki.
We then analyzed the political takeover via the CUP, noting the alleged Masonic and financial links to Western powers, the deposition of Abdullah II, and the adoption of that secretive Carbonari operational model.
And finally, we examine the startling assertion that the fundamental concepts, the slogans, the organizational structures of modern Turkish nationalism were strategically engineered by Jewish Zionist thinkers like Kahun, Vamburi, and Galanti,
using Zionist taqiyya to conceal their true goals. The sheer specificity of the points, from connecting Turks to the Torah to the alleged coining of the core national slogan, that's what makes this source material such a compelling example of historical revisionism.
It forces us to consider a complete shadow history.
A powerful, structured narrative that exists entirely outside of accepted institutional histories.
This deep dive really forces you to ask,
Well,
if the roots of a modern state's central identity and ideology, something as foundational as nationalism, are systematically concealed, as this source alleges, what other foundational truths might be intentionally obscured or manipulated across different national histories around the world?
this should prompt you to question not just who wrote your nation's history, but why they chose the narrative they did, and what external interests that narrative might ultimately be serving.
Something to mull over until our next deep dive.